$1. Those two words shattered the jeering crowd into stunned silence. In a dusty frontier town where human souls were auctioned like cattle, a haunted Civil War veteran just made the most dangerous bid of his life. What happened next would ignite a firestorm that threatened to burn them both alive. This is the story of Eli Hartman and Mara, a tale of redemption forged in defiance, where a single dollar became worth more than gold. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The sun beat down on the wooden platform like God's own hammer, merciless and unyielding. Dust devils danced through the main street of Copper Ridge, a town so small it barely deserved a name, yet large enough to harbor the worst of human cruelty. The year was 1869, and the West was still wild, still lawless, still a place where a man's worth was measured in bullets and a woman's in bidding wars. Eli Hartman stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hands gripping a fence post like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this God-forsaken earth. At 42, he looked older, the kind of age that comes not from years, but from witnessing things no man should ever see. His face was a roadmap of sorrow, deep lines carved around eyes that had watched boys die at Gettysburg, had held his dying wife's hand through a fever that no amount of prayer could break, had buried hope in the same grave as his stillborn son. He'd come to town for supplies, flour, coffee, maybe some nails if he could afford them. He hadn't come for this. The crowd pressed forward, a writhing mass of unwashed bodies in cruel anticipation. Eli could smell them, sweat whiskey tobacco, and something worse, excitement. The kind of dark thrill that possesses men when they forget that other people are human. "Step right up, gentlemen." The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip across the assembled faces. Silas Blackwood was his name, a snake oil salesman turned flesh peddler with a smile that belonged on a corpse. "Fresh merchandise today, straight from the territories. She's young, she's strong, and she's yours for the right price." Eli's stomach churned. He should leave. He should turn around, climb back on his wagon, and ride the 15 miles back to his ranch where he could pretend the world wasn't rotting from the inside out. But his boots stayed planted in the dirt as if the earth itself demanded he bear witness. On the platform stood a figure that barely looked human. A burlap sack covered her head tied roughly around her neck. Her hands were bound behind her back with hemp rope so tight that even from a distance Eli could see the raw bleeding welts around her wrists. Her dress, if you could call it that, was little more than rags torn and filthy, hanging off a frame that trembled despite obvious efforts to stand tall. Her feet were bare cut and bruised from God knows what journey had brought her to this moment. "Now I know what you're thinking." Silas continued pacing the platform like a ringmaster at some hellish circus. "Indians ain't worth much these days, but this one's special, young enough to train, strong enough to work, and pretty enough to, well, I'll leave that to your imagination, boys." The crowd erupted in laughter, the kind that made Eli's blood run cold. These weren't men anymore. They were wolves, and they'd caught the scent of prey. "Let's start the bidding at $20. Who'll give me 20? "5, shouted someone from the back. $5? "Are you insulting me, Clarence? This here's prime merchandise." "She's a Comanche," another voice called out. "Probably got the devil in her. I'll give you $3, and that's generous." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Eli watched the figure on the platform sway slightly as if the words themselves were physical blows. Through the rough weave of the burlap sack, he could hear breathing, rapid, shallow, the sound of someone fighting panic with every fiber of their being. $10, came a new voice, smooth as honey and twice as poisonous. Eli didn't need to turn to know who it was. Reed Dalton. The man who'd probably brought her here in the first place. Reed was everything Eli wasn't. Young, handsome, prosperous. He owned half the land between here and Santa Fe, acquired through means that were best not examined too closely. He wore his cruelty like a fine suit tailored and displayed for all to admire. "Now that's more like it," Silas beamed. $10 from Mr. Dalton. "Do I hear 50s?" The woman on the platform made a sound, not quite a whimper, but close. It was the sound of a spirit breaking of hope, finally dying after a long, brutal struggle. And in that moment, something inside Eli Hartman fractured. He saw her differently now, not as the savage the crowd labeled her, but as someone's daughter, someone who had a name before it was stolen. Someone who had laughed once, loved once, lived once before the world decided she was worth less than a good horse. He saw his wife Sarah, her dark hair spread across the pillow, as fever consumed her, whispering with her last breath, "Don't let the world make you hard, Eli. Don't let it take your heart." He saw his mother telling him stories by candlelight about treating all God's creatures with dignity, even when the world forgot how. He saw himself in a mirror he'd been avoiding for 5 long years, a coward who'd survived a war but lost the battle for his own soul. Going once at $10. Silas raised his gavel. The woman's shoulders shook. Beneath that hood, she was crying, trying not to failing, hating herself for the weakness. Eli knew that feeling. He'd lived it every day since burying his family. Going twice? The crowd held its breath. Reed Dalton smiled like a cat with a mouse between its paws. Eli's mouth opened before his brain could stop it. $1. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The entire town square seemed to freeze, as if time itself was trying to understand what had just happened. Then Silas laughed a high, wheezing sound. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said $1. Eli's voice was stronger now, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. He stepped forward, pushing through the crowd that parted reluctantly before him. "That's my bid." "Are you drunk, Hartman?" Reed's voice had lost its smoothness, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "I bid $10. "And I bid 1, Eli repeated, finally reaching the front of the crowd. He looked up at Silas, then at the woman on the platform. $1, that's what I'm offering." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some laughed, some cursed, some just stared like they'd witnessed a man lose his mind in real time. Reed's face flushed crimson, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. "You can't, that ain't how this works," Silas sputtered, looking between Eli and Reed like a man caught between 2 rabid dogs. "Mr. Dalton bid $10, and I'm bidding 1, Eli said calmly, though nothing about him felt calm. His insides were a war zone, every instinct screaming at him to run to take it back to be sensible. But he'd been sensible for 5 years, and it had gotten him nothing but an empty house and a dying soul. "You said fresh merchandise. You want to make a sale or not?" The woman had gone completely still. Beneath that hood, Eli imagined eyes wide with confusion, trying to understand what kind of game was being played now. Silas looked at Reed, who was practically vibrating with rage. The auctioneer's calculating mind was working overtime. $10 from Reed Dalton was good money, but humiliating Reed Dalton in front of the whole town. That could be dangerous. On the other hand, Eli Hartman was nobody, nothing, just a broken-down rancher barely scraping by. "I'll give you 15, Reed snarled. $1, Eli repeated, not breaking eye contact with Silas. "Take it or leave it." "This is insane!" Reed stepped forward, and the crowd shifted, sensing violence about to erupt. "I bid $15. "Then you're a fool," Eli said quietly, turning to face Reed for the first time. The younger man was taller, stronger, meaner. But Eli had fought at Gettysburg. He'd stared down Confederate cannons and walked through fields of the dead. Reed Dalton, for all his swagger, had never seen real war. "You're bidding $15 for something everyone here agrees ain't worth spit. I'm offering $1. That seems about right to me." It was an insult wrapped in logic, and the crowd knew it. A few men chuckled nervously. Reed's face went from red to purple. "You son of a bitch," Reed breathed. "You're making a fool of me." "No," Eli said. "I'm making a bid. You can top it if you want, but ask yourself, is your pride worth $16? The silence that followed was suffocating. Every eye in that square was locked on Reed Dalton, watching to see what he'd do. Would he pay? Would he draw? Would he back down? Reed's hand hovered over his gun, trembling with rage. But he wasn't stupid. Killing a man over a $1 bid would make him a laughingstock. An out-here reputation was everything. Being humiliated was bad. Being mocked was worse. "Keep the savage," Reed finally spat, turning on his heel. "She'll probably slit your throat in your sleep anyway, Hartman. Do us all a favor and let her." He stormed off, and the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. Eli watched him go, feeling no triumph, only a strange numbness. What had he just done? Well, Silas said, his showman's smile strained and false. I suppose we have ourselves a sale. $1 to the... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't make this moment seem as pathetic as it was to the gentleman farmer. A few scattered laughs. Mostly the crowd was dispersing the show over the entertainment value, exhausted. They'd come for a spectacle and gotten something else entirely. Something uncomfortable that made them want to go home and forget they'd been here at all. Eli climbed the platform steps, his bad knee protesting every movement. Up close, he could see the woman trembling, could hear her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps through the burlap. Fear radiated off her like heat. Easy, he murmured, not sure if she could understand him. I'm not going to hurt you. Silas handed him a piece of rope, her lead, like she was livestock. Eli took it, his skin crawling at the feel of it. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single silver dollar, nearly all the money he had left until the cattle sale next month, and placed it in Silas's waiting palm. Pleasure doing business, Silas said with a greasy smile. She's all yours. But Hartman, word of advice, keep her locked up tight. Comanche women are like wildcats, beautiful to look at, but they'll claw your eyes out first chance they get. Eli didn't respond. He turned to the woman, to this human being he'd just purchased for the price of a bottle of whiskey, and reached for the rope around her neck. She flinched violently, a sound escaping her throat that was pure animal terror. I'm just going to cut these ropes, Eli said softly, pulling his knife from his belt. Hold still. She went rigid, probably expecting the blade to find her throat instead. But Eli was careful, sawing through the hemp binding her wrists first. The rope fell away, and she immediately brought her hands forward, cradling her torn wrists against her chest. Next, he reached for the sack over her head. She tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go, not on this platform, not with the whole town watching. Eli moved slowly, telegraphing every movement until his fingers found the knot at her neck. Easy now, he whispered. Just getting this off you. The knot was tight, pulled cruel and hard. His fingers worked at it, and he could feel her pulse beneath his knuckles, rapid, terrified, the heartbeat of a rabbit in a snare. Finally, the knot gave way. Eli lifted the sack. The world stopped. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 20, maybe less. Her face was a map of suffering bruised dirt, streaked with a split lip that was still bleeding. Her hair, black as midnight, was matted and tangled, hanging around her face in wild disarray. But it was her eyes that stole his breath. They were dark, so dark they were almost black, and they held a defiance that was breathtaking. Despite everything, despite the humiliation, the pain, the degradation, those eyes blazed with a fury that said she was not broken. Bowed, perhaps. Beaten down, certainly. But not broken. She met his gaze, and in that moment, Eli understood that he hadn't saved her. If anything, he'd probably just complicated both their lives beyond measure. But it was done now. For better or worse, their fates were tangled together like the rope he still held in his hands. Can you walk? He asked. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't understand English. Maybe she just didn't want to give him the satisfaction. But when he started down the platform steps, she followed her bare feet, finding each plank with a wince that told him every step was agony. The crowd had mostly dispersed, but those who remained watched with a mixture of curiosity, disgust, and pity. Eli ignored them all. He led her to his wagon, a beaten-up thing that had seen better days, pulled by a mule even more stubborn than he was. Up you go, us, he said, gesturing to the wagon bed. She stared at it, then at him, suspicion written in every line of her battered face. For a long moment he thought she might bolt, might run for the open desert, and take her chances with the rattlesnakes and coyotes rather than trust him. But finally, moving like every bone in her body hurt, she climbed into the wagon bed. She settled into the far corner, drawing her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. Eli threw a blanket over her, not to hide her, but because the sun was brutal and she had no protection. She grabbed it, pulling it around herself like armor. He climbed onto the driver's seat, took up the reins, and clicked his tongue. The mule started forward with a reluctant plod, and they began the long journey home. The town fell away behind them. The desert stretched ahead, vast and indifferent to human drama. Eli didn't look back, but he could feel her eyes on him, boring into his spine, trying to figure out what kind of monster she'd ended up with this time. They rode in silence for an hour, maybe more. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon, the plod of the mule's hooves, and the whisper of wind through the scrub brush. Eli's mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell he was going to do now. He had no plan. That was the God's honest truth. He'd acted on impulse, on some desperate need to prove to himself that he was still human, still capable of doing one decent thing. But what now? What did you do with a human being you just bought for $1? I'm not. He started, then stopped, cleared his throat. I'm not like them, the men in town. I won't. He couldn't find the words. How did you explain to someone who'd been bought and sold that you didn't actually want to own them? How did you say, I made a mistake, when that mistake was a living, breathing person sitting 3 feet behind you? There's a barn, he finally settled on. On my ranch. It's warm, dry. You can stay there. I'll bring you food, water. And when... He trailed off. When what? When she was ready to leave. Where would she go? We'll figure something out. No response from the wagon bed. He hadn't expected one. The sun was starting its descent when they finally reached his property. It wasn't much a small ranch house that needed paint, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a corral that held 3 aging cows, and a horse with a bad attitude. 15 acres of dust and determination bought with his army pay and maintained through sheer stubbornness. It was home. Or it had been once before it became just a place where he slept between days of trying to forget. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop near the barn. He climbed down slowly, his knee protesting after hours of sitting, and walked around to the back. She was exactly as he'd left her, curled in the corner, watching him with those burning eyes. Come on, he said, offering his hand. She looked at his hand like it was a snake, didn't take it, but she did climb out of the wagon, landing in the dirt with barely a sound. Even hurt, even exhausted, she moved like a ghost. Eli led her to the barn, acutely aware of her limping behind him. He pushed open the door, it creaked in protest, and gestured inside. It's not much, he said. But there's hay for bedding, and I'll bring you blankets. Food, too. Are you hungry? Those eyes just stared at him, unblinking. Right, he muttered. Stupid question. Of course you're hungry. He showed her where the hay was piled, where she could make a bed. There was a water trough, clean fresh. He'd filled it that morning for the horse. She could drink from that. I'll be back, he said, backing toward the door. With food and other things. You need clothes, real clothes, medicine for those cuts. Still, she said nothing, but she was watching his every move, cataloging escape routes, threats, possibilities. He recognized the look. He'd worn it himself for months after Gettysburg, sleeping with one eye open, waiting for the next artillery shell to blow his world apart. Eli left the barn, closing the door behind him, and stood in the fading light of his ranch, wondering what in God's name he'd done. Inside the house, he moved through rooms that felt too big, too empty. Sarah's things were still everywhere, her shawl on the back of a chair, her books on the shelf, her hairbrush on the dresser. He'd been unable to move them, unable to accept that she was truly gone. He gathered what he could find, an old dress of Sarah's, some bread that was only slightly stale-dried meat, a jar of preserves. He found bandages and the whiskey he used for cleaning wounds. His hands shook as he assembled it, all the reality of what he'd done finally crashing over him. He'd brought a stranger to his home. A woman who'd been bought and sold, who'd been brutalized by men who looked just like him. A woman who probably wanted nothing more than to see him dead. And he'd done it for $1. Eli carried the supplies back to the barn as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. He knocked on the barn door, ridiculous knocking on his own barn, and pushed it open. She was standing in the far corner, having rejected the hay he'd shown her. In her hand was a piece of wood, sharp and broken, held like a weapon. Her message was clear: come closer at your own risk. I brought food, Eli said, setting the basket down just inside the door. And clothes. Medicine for your wrists and feet. He pointed to each item as he spoke, moving slowly, deliberately. Food, clothes, medicine. They're yours. I'm not... He took a breath. I'm not going to hurt you. I know you don't believe that. I know you have no reason to, but it's true. She didn't move, didn't lower the makeshift weapon. I'll leave this here, he said, backing toward the door again. You do whatever you need to do. Sleep, eat, don't eat. It's up to you. I'll bring more food in the morning. He paused at the threshold, one hand on the door. My name's Eli, he said quietly. Eli Hartman. And whatever you've been through, whatever brought you to that platform today, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. Then he left, closing the door behind him, wondering if she understood a single word he'd said. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the wind through the eaves, the distant cry of a coyote, and somewhere out there in the barn, a woman who had every reason to hate him, to fear him, to want him dead. He thought about Reed Dalton's parting words. She'll probably slit your throat in your sleep anyway. Maybe she would. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe this was how the story was supposed to end, a broken man killed by the one person he'd tried to save, a final act of cosmic justice for a life wasted on survival instead of living. The thought didn't scare him as much as it should have. As the moon rose high and full, Eli finally drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of auctions and battlefields, of Sarah's dying breath and dark eyes that burned with unbreakable fire. In the barn, Mara, though Eli didn't know that name yet, sat with her back against the wall, the sharp piece of wood still clutched in her bleeding hands, and watched the door with eyes that had forgotten how to close. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning, that $1 had bought them both something neither expected: a chance at redemption, at healing, at finding something worth living for in a world that had tried its best to kill them both. But that understanding would come later. For now, they were just two broken people in the darkness, separated by 100 yards and 1,000 unspoken wounds, wondering if tomorrow would be better or just another kind of hell. The desert night stretched on, indifferent and eternal, holding its secrets close. Dawn broke cold and hesitant over the ranch, as if the sun itself was uncertain about illuminating what the previous day had wrought. Eli hadn't slept more than an hour, his mind churning through scenarios that ranged from finding the barn empty to finding himself with a homemade weapon buried in his chest. When gray light finally seeped through his window, he rose with the weariness of a man who'd aged a decade overnight. He dressed slowly, his hands fumbling with buttons that suddenly seemed too complicated. Through the window he could see the barn standing silent in the morning mist, revealing nothing of what or who might be inside. His coffee sat untouched on the table, growing cold, as he stared at it, trying to find courage in the bottom of a cup. Finally, he forced himself to move. He gathered what food he could spare: eggs from his chickens, more bread, some jerky, and filled a canteen with fresh water. His hands shook slightly as he arranged everything in a basket, and he hated himself for the fear. What kind of man was afraid to face a starving, injured woman half his size? The kind who knows what desperation looks like. His mind answered. The kind who's seen what the will to survive can make people do. The walk to the barn felt longer than 15 miles. Each step brought new doubts, new fears, new certainties that he'd made the worst mistake of his life. When he reached the door, he stood there for a full minute, basket in hand, listening for any sound from within. Nothing. I'm coming in, he called out, his voice rough with sleeplessness. I've got food. I'm going to open the door slow. He did just that, pushing the door open inch by inch, half expecting something to come flying at his head. But the barn was still morning light, slanting through the gaps in the wood, illuminating dust motes that danced like small ghosts. She was exactly where he'd left her, in the far corner back against the wall. But something had changed. The basket he'd left the night before was empty, the food gone, the dress taken. She was wearing it now, Sarah's old blue calico, though it hung on her frame like a tent. The medicine bottle was open, and he could see crude bandages wrapped around her wrists and feet, torn from some fabric he couldn't identify. She'd used the hay, after all. A small nest of it was arranged in the corner, and the blanket he'd given her was wrapped around her shoulders. But she was awake, alert, watching him with those same burning eyes, the sharp piece of wood still visible in her hand. "Morning," Eli said, setting the new basket down in the same spot as before. "I brought breakfast, such as it is." Her eyes followed his every movement, but she said nothing. He noticed her jaw was clenched, her body coiled tight as a spring, ready to run or fight whichever the moment demanded. "I need to tend to the animals," Eli continued, backing toward the door. "I'll be around the ranch if you need anything. Just holler. Or don't, up to you." He left before the silence could swallow him whole. The morning chores provided a familiar rhythm. Feed the chickens, milk the cow, check the fences. Eli threw himself into the work with an intensity that wasn't quite necessary, trying to outrun the thoughts that chased him. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't keep her locked in the barn forever, but he couldn't just turn her loose either, not with Reed Dalton and his type lurking around. She'd be dead or worse within a day. He was mending a section of fence when he felt it, that prickle on the back of his neck that said he was being watched. Eli turned slowly, scanning the ranch, and there, barely visible in the barn's doorway, was a shadow. She was watching him work, keeping her distance, but no longer hiding completely. It was progress. Microscopic perhaps, but progress nonetheless. The days began to establish a pattern, though calling it a routine would be generous. Eli would bring food 3 times a day, setting it just inside the barn door, announcing his presence, never pushing closer than she seemed able to tolerate. Sometimes the previous basket would be empty. Sometimes food would remain untouched, and he'd worry that she was starving herself out of pride or fear. He'd leave the new basket anyway, taking the old one without comment. He started talking to her, or rather, talking near her. Not expecting responses, just filling the silence with words that might eventually seem less threatening than the quiet. "Fence is down on the north pasture," he'd say, setting down the morning basket. "Going to need to fix that before the cows decide to go exploring. Had a cow once old Bessie, she could smell freedom from a mile away. Every time I'd turn my back, she'd find some new way to escape. Finally just gave up and let her wander. She always came back anyway, usually around feeding time." No response. But he thought maybe she seemed to listen. "Weather's changing," he'd mention at lunch. "Can feel it in my knee. Got shot there at Gettysburg. Took the bullet out myself with a knife I'd heated in a campfire. Dumbest thing I ever did, but I was 22 and thought I was invincible. Now every time a storm's coming, that old wound starts singing." The afternoons were the hardest. The work was done, the sun was high, and there was nothing left but time and thinking. Eli would sit on his porch pretending to read Sarah's old books, but really watching the barn from the corner of his eye. Occasionally he'd catch glimpses of her, a shadow moving past the door, a flash of blue calico, once her hand reaching out to feel the rain that started falling on the 3rd day. It was on the 5th day that things shifted. Eli was working near the barn replacing rotted boards in the corral fence. He'd been talking, as had become his habit, about nothing in particular. The price of cattle, the taste of his own cooking compared to Sarah's, the family of rabbits that had taken up residence under his porch. "I swear those rabbits are plotting something," he muttered, hammering a nail into place. "The big one, he looks at me with these eyes that say he knows all my secrets. If rabbits could talk, I'd be in real trouble." He reached for another nail, and that's when he saw it. The gate latch on the empty stall, the one that had been broken for weeks, was fixed. The leather strap he'd been meaning to replace was neatly mended with some kind of plant fiber woven so carefully that it was actually stronger than the original. Eli straightened slowly, looking at the repair, then at the barn. She was nowhere to be seen, but he knew she was there watching. "Did you—" he started, then stopped. His throat felt tight. "Thank you." The next morning, one of his shirts, the one he'd torn on barbed wire and thrown in a pile to maybe fix someday, was hanging on a fence post mended with the same careful stitching. The day after that, his tools, which he habitually left scattered around, were arranged neatly by the barn door. She was communicating the only way she felt safe, through actions instead of words. Each small gesture was a message: "I see you. I'm here. I'm not broken yet." Eli started leaving things for her to find. A bar of soap he'd been saving, a comb that had been Sarah's, a pair of boots that were too small for him but might fit her feet. He'd set them out like offerings, never mentioning them, never expecting acknowledgement. But they always disappeared, and in their place he'd find some small repair, some task completed, some silent thank you. The first week bled into the second, and the silence between them began to feel less hostile and more cautious, like 2 wounded animals circling each other, trying to determine if the other was predator or fellow prey. It was on day 12 that Eli made his mistake. He was bringing the evening meal, a stew he'd actually tried to make palatable, when a storm rolled in with shocking speed. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black as midnight thunder, cracking like artillery fire. The first drops of rain hit like bullets, and within seconds it was a deluge. Eli ran for the barn basket clutched to his chest, soaked through before he'd made it halfway. He burst through the door, gasping water streaming from his clothes and hair. "Sorry," he sputtered, setting down the basket with shaking hands. "Didn't mean to. The storm came up so fast, I just—" He looked up and froze. She was standing in the center of the barn, as far from him as the space allowed, but for the first time she wasn't hiding in the shadows. The lightning flashing through the gaps in the walls illuminated her face, and what he saw there stopped his heart. Terror. Pure absolute terror. But not of him. Of the storm. Thunder crashed again close enough to shake the barn's foundations, and she flinched violently, her hands flying up to cover her ears. Her whole body was trembling, her breathing rapid and shallow. She looked like she was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Hey," Eli said softly, raising his hand slowly. "Hey, it's okay. It's just a storm. It can't hurt you in here." Another crack of thunder, and she made a sound, a whimper quickly cut off, as if she was angry at herself for showing weakness. She stumbled backward, hit the wall, slid down it, until she was curled into a ball, arms wrapped around her head. Eli's mind raced. He'd seen this before in soldiers after the war. The way certain sounds, certain sights, would drag them back to the battlefield, trap them in memories that were more real than the present. Sarah had told him once that he'd screamed in his sleep during thunderstorms, had woken up swinging at enemies that weren't there. This was the same thing. Something about the storm, about the thunder and lightning, was taking her somewhere else. Somewhere terrible. Without thinking, Eli started talking. Not the casual rambling he'd been doing for days, but something different, something real. "I know," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know how it feels. When the thunder sounds like cannons and the lightning looks like muzzle flash. When you can't tell what's real and what's memory. I know." She didn't look up, but her shoulders shifted slightly, listening. "Gettysburg." Eli continued, lowering himself to sit on the floor, keeping his distance but making himself less threatening. "July 1863. 3 days of hell. The noise was— it was like the world was ending, constant. Thunder that wasn't thunder, screaming, metal, tearing through air, through flesh, through bone. The rain pounded harder on the roof, but Eli's voice cut through it, giving her something to anchor to. Afterward, I couldn't stand storms, still can't really. Every time it thunders, I'm 22 again, covered in dirt and blood, watching boys die. Boys who should have been worried about asking girls to dances, not about whether they'd live to see another sunrise. Lightning flashed bright and violent, but Eli didn't flinch. He just kept talking. "My wife Sarah, she used to help me through it. She'd light every lamp in the house, talk to me about ordinary things. Recipes she wanted to try, colors she thought would look nice for new curtains. Anything to remind me that I was home, that I was safe, that the war was over." He paused, his own throat tight with memory. "She died 5 years ago. Fever took her in 2 days. Since then, I've weathered storms alone. And I won't lie to you, it doesn't get easier. But you learn to survive them. You learn that the thunder eventually stops. The lightning fades. Morning comes, even when you're sure it won't." The barn fell quiet, except for the rain, softer, now the worst of the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. Eli sat there, his clothes soaking the floor beneath him, watching her slowly uncurl from her defensive ball. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes found his across the dimness of the barn. For the first time, there wasn't just defiance there, or fear or suspicion. There was recognition, the acknowledgement of one survivor seeing another. "Whatever happened to you," Eli said quietly, "whatever thunder sounds like in your memory, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you have to carry that, but you're here now. You're safe. As safe as I can make you anyway." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, so slowly, he almost missed it. She nodded. Just once. Barely a movement at all. But it was there. It was the first real communication between them, and it felt like the earth shifting beneath his feet. Eli stood slowly, water dripping from his clothes. "I should go. Get into dry things. The stew's there if you want it. It's probably terrible, but it's hot at least." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on it. "Good night," he said, then added softer, "You did good. Getting through that. You did real good." He left her there and walked back to the house, through the dying rain, feeling something crack open inside his chest. something that had been sealed shut since Sarah's death since the war, since he'd stopped believing that human connection was possible for someone like him. That night, for the first time in weeks, Eli slept without dreams of auction blocks or battlefields. And in the barn, Mara, though he still didn't know her name, slept with marginally less fear. The piece of wood finally set aside, still within reach, but no longer gripped like salvation. The days that followed were different. The silence remained, but it had changed texture. She still didn't speak, still kept her distance, but the invisible wall between them had developed cracks. Eli started working closer to the barn. Not intrusively, just present. He'd mend fences within her line of sight, fix tools where she could watch if she chose. And she did watch, he could feel it. Occasionally he'd look up and catch a glimpse of her in the doorway, or standing by the corral observing his work with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging everything learning. On the 16th day he found something new, a drawing in the dirt near the barn made with a stick or finger. It was crude but unmistakable a flower. Not just any flower, but one he recognized from the desert, a small bloom that fought its way through impossible conditions to survive. Eli stared at it for a long time, something stirring in his memory. Sarah had loved wildflowers, had kept books about them, had dragged him on walks just to identify different species. He went to the house, found her old botany book dusty and worn, and flipped through the pages until he found it. Prairie star, desert marigold. No there. A small illustration with careful notes in Sarah's handwriting. Mara, desert bloom, eternal flower. His hand shook as he read the description. A flower that thrived in harsh conditions, that bloomed when others withered, that came back year after year, no matter how hostile the environment. Mara, he whispered to the empty house. The next morning, when he brought breakfast, he paused at the barn door longer than usual. I found your flower, he said to the silence within, in my wife's book. She loved wildflowers, knew all their names. This one, it's called Mara, means eternal bloom. It's beautiful, tough too. Survives things that would kill other plants. He set down the basket and added softer, seems like a fitting name, if that's what you want to be called. Mara. He didn't wait for a response, didn't expect one. But as he walked away, he could have sworn he heard something. A breath maybe. Or the ghost of a word that wasn't quite ready to be spoken. From that day forward, he called her Mara. Not to her face exactly, he still maintained respectful distance, but in his own mind in the way he referred to her in his running commentary. Going to town, Mara, he'd call out before leaving. Be back before dark. Help yourself to anything in the garden if you want. Fix the porch step, Mara. Should stop creaking now. Found some fabric in Sarah's trunk. Leaving it by your door if you want to make something. He never asked if she minded the name. Never demanded she accept it. It was just there, offered, like everything else a gift she could take or refuse. The changing pattern of their days became almost comfortable. Eli would work talk leave offerings. Mara would accept them, complete small tasks, leave her own silent responses. It was communication without words, understanding without conversation, and it filled something in Eli that had been hollow for too long. But comfort in the West was always temporary. It was late afternoon on day 19 when Eli noticed the dust cloud on the horizon. His stomach dropped. Visitors meant questions, and questions meant danger for both of them. He set down his tools and walked toward the barn, moving with purpose, but not panic. Mara, he called out louder than usual. Someone's coming. You need to stay in the barn. Stay hidden. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Understand? Silence. But he saw a shadow shift in the doorway. She'd heard him. The rider resolved into a familiar shape as it got closer. Will Patterson, the general store owner from town. Eli's jaw unclenched slightly. Will was decent enough, one of the few who'd looked uncomfortable during the auction. Eli, Will called out, pulling his horse to a stop. Didn't expect to see you out here. Thought maybe you'd... He trailed off, his eyes scanning the ranch as if looking for something specific. Looking for something, Will... Eli kept his voice casual, but his hand rested near the rifle leaning against the fence post. Just checking in, Will said, but his tone suggested otherwise. Some folks in town are talking about that Indian girl, the one you... He coughed awkwardly. The one you bought. What about her? Reed Dalton's been running his mouth. Says you got her locked up out here, says you're probably doing God knows what. Some of the men will look genuinely uncomfortable now. Some of them are thinking about riding out here, making sure everything's proper. Eli's blood ran cold. Tell them to stay away from my property, Will. What happens on my land is my business. I'm not disagreeing with you, Eli. I'm just warning you. Reed's got people riled up. You know how he is. Makes everything about his pride. Will glanced toward the barn, then quickly away. Is she all right? The girl? She's fine. Better than fine. She's fed, clothed, safe. More than she was in that town square. I believe you, Eli. I do. But Reed, he's saying you got no right to her. Says the sale wasn't proper. Says he's within his rights to take her back. Take her back to what another auction being passed around like a bottle of whiskey. Eli's voice rose despite himself. You tell Reed Dalton that if he steps foot on my property, he'll leave in a box. Will's eyes widened. Now, Eli, that kind of talk isn't talk, Will. It's a promise. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Will sighed and turned his horse. I'll tell them, but Eli, watch yourself. Reed's not the type to let things go. He's been embarrassed, and that makes him dangerous. Let him come, Eli said quietly. I've faced worse than Reed Dalton. Will rode off, leaving Eli standing in the dust, his heart hammering against his ribs. He waited until the rider disappeared over the horizon before turning back to the barn. Mara, he called out. He's gone. You can... But she was already there standing in the doorway. Her face pale, but her jaw set with determination. She'd heard everything. There might be trouble coming, Eli said, dropping any pretense of casual distance. Men from town. They're looking for an excuse to, I don't know what, but nothing good. She met his eyes, and he saw something shift in them, a decision being made. Then for the first time in 19 days, she spoke. Eli. The word was barely a whisper rough from disuse and accented with something musical and foreign, but it was his name, clear and unmistakable. His breath caught. Yes, he managed. Yes, Eli. She held his gaze for another moment, then retreated back into the barn's shadows. But something fundamental had changed between them. She'd given him his name, spoken it, aloud claimed it. And in doing so, she'd made a choice to trust him, at least enough to speak. That night, Eli sat on his porch long after dark, his rifle across his lap, watching the horizon for dust clouds that didn't come. Inside the barn, Mara sat awake as well. Sarah's old shawl wrapped around her shoulders, another offering that she'd finally accepted, her mind working through problems of survival and trust, danger and hope. Neither of them slept much. They were both too aware that the fragile peace they'd built could shatter at any moment, that Reed Dalton wasn't done with them, that the world outside this small ranch was still cruel, still ready to tear apart anything beautiful or good. But they had something now that they hadn't had before, a connection, a name spoken in darkness, the beginning of something that might, if they were lucky, if they were careful, if they were strong enough, become trust. The moon rose high and cold over the desert, illuminating two souls learning to be human again, one careful step at a time. The morning after Mara spoke his name, Eli woke to find her standing outside the barn for the first time since she'd arrived. Not hiding in the doorway, not lurking in shadows, but actually standing in the open air, her face turned toward the rising sun like a flower seeking light. The sight stopped him cold on his porch coffee cup, halfway to his lips. She turned when she heard his door creak, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the dusty yard. 20 paces separated them, but it felt like miles had collapsed overnight. Her hair was braided now. She must have used Sarah's comb, and the blue calico dress had been altered to fit her frame. She looked less like a ghost and more like a person, and the transformation took his breath away. "Morning?" Eli said, his voice carrying across the stillness. "Morning," she replied, and though the word was soft, barely more than a whisper, it landed between them like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples in every direction. He wanted to say more, wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but some instinct told him to let this moment be what it was. Fragile, new, easily broken by too much weight. So he just nodded and took a sip of his coffee, and she turned back to watch the sun climb higher, and that was enough. The days that followed unfurled like a flower, opening petal by petal, revealing something neither of them had dared hope for. Mara began to emerge from the barn more frequently, though always when Eli was visible, never when he was out of sight. It was as if she needed to know where he was at all times, needed to maintain that careful distance, even as it slowly, incrementally decreased. She started helping with the ranch work, though she did it in her own way, on her own terms. Eli would be mending a fence and turn to find her holding the post steady without a word spoken. He'd be hauling water and discover the buckets already filled. The garden, which he'd neglected into a patch of stubborn weeds, suddenly began showing signs of careful tending rows, straightened soil. Turned the struggling plants coaxed back to life with a knowledge he didn't possess. "You're good with growing things," he observed one afternoon, watching her work the soil with her bare hands, mixing something into it that looked like ash and crushed bone. She glanced up at him, her hands stilling. "My mother," she said each word carefully chosen as if she was rationing them. "She taught me. Before. Before." That single word held universes of pain, entire histories of loss. Eli didn't push for more. He'd learned that Mara's story would come out in pieces, if it came at all, and only when she was ready to give them. "She was a wise woman then," he said simply. "The gardens never looked better." Something flickered across Mara's face, grief maybe, or gratitude, or some complex emotion that had no name. She returned to her work, and Eli returned to his, and the silence between them felt companionable rather than tense. But the threat hanging over them hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had grown more ominous with each passing day. Eli kept his rifle close now, always loaded, always within reach. He'd catch himself scanning the horizon more than necessary, listening for hoofbeats that weren't there yet, but surely would be. The waiting was its own kind of torture. It was on the 25th day that the careful peace they'd built began to crack. Eli was teaching Mara to read, or trying to. They'd fallen into an evening routine where he'd sit on the porch, and she'd sit on the steps close but not too close, and he'd go through Sarah's books showing her the words, sounding them out. Her English was better than he'd initially thought, just buried under layers of caution and trauma. She could understand most of what he said, could speak when she chose to, but reading was different. "This one," Eli said, pointing to a word in the botany book. "Can you sound it out?" Mara leaned closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. Perennial. Perennial, Eli corrected gently, means it comes back every year, like you, like Mara flowers. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. "You think I come back even when cut down? I think you're still here, aren't you? After everything, that's coming back, that's surviving." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the illustration of the flower. "In my language, we have a different word. Nitaka means the one who remains when others fall." "Nitaka," Eli repeated, testing the word. "That's beautiful." "Your language, it's Comanche." Her whole body went rigid, and Eli cursed himself for pushing too far too fast, but then she nodded just barely. "Numinu," she said. "That's what we call ourselves, the people, not the name others gave us." "Numinu," Eli echoed, committing it to memory. "Thank you for telling me." They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Eli was about to suggest they call it a night when Mara spoke again, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. "My mother, she was Nithaka. They killed her anyway." Eli's breath caught. He didn't move, didn't speak, afraid that any response might make her stop. "The soldiers came to our camp, said we were too close to the settlement, said we had to move. My father, he tried to talk to them. He spoke their language, tried to explain we were just hunting, passing through." Her voice was flat now, distant, as if she was recounting someone else's story. "They shot him first, then the others. My mother, she hid me under a buffalo hide, told me not to move, not to breathe. I heard her die, heard all of them die. God, Mara, You asked me once why storms frighten me," she continued, speaking over him. "The thunder sounds like their guns. The lightning looks like muzzle flash. I was 12 years old hiding under dead buffalo skin listening to my world end. And when it was quiet, when I finally came out, they were all gone. Everything gone. Eli's throat was tight, his eyes burning. How did you? I walked for days. Tried to find another camp, another family, found white men instead. They traded me, sold me, used me. For 8 years I was passed around like something without a soul. She looked at him then and her eyes were dry but devastated. Until a man bought me for $1, and I couldn't understand why. Couldn't understand what new cruelty he had planned that required so little money. Mara, Eli said, his voice breaking. I never meant to. I know, she said simply. I know that now. But that day on the wagon, I was planning how to kill you, where to strike so it would be quick. I had it all worked out. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a long moment. You left me the blanket, left me food and walked away. Left me the weapon I could use against you, the sharp wood, and never tried to take it. You gave me choices, small ones but choices. No one had done that in 8 years. She pulled Sarah's shawl tighter around her shoulders. And you talked to me like I was human. Even when I didn't respond, even when I gave you nothing back, you talked to me like I mattered. Eli had to look away, had to blink hard against the moisture in his eyes. You do matter, Mara. You always did. In your world, I'm property, a savage, an animal wearing a dress. Not in my world, Eli said fiercely. Maybe in their world, in that town's world, but not in mine. She studied his face in the dying light, searching for something. What am I in your world, Eli Hartman? He thought about it, really thought about it. A survivor, he said finally. A woman who knows how to make things grow in dead soil. Someone who fixes broken things without being asked. Someone who's teaching me that maybe not everything in this world is beyond repair. Mara's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through her careful walls. You're trying to fix me. No, Eli said quickly. No, I'm trying to. I don't know what I'm trying to do, Mara. I just know that when you're here, the silence in this place doesn't feel so heavy. The ghosts don't crowd so close. I'm not trying to fix you. I think you're about the strongest person I've ever met. I'm just trying to give you a place where you don't have to be strong all the time, where you can breathe without looking over your shoulder. She turned away, but not before he saw her expression crack, saw something like hope or pain, or both flash across her face. When she spoke again, her voice was thick. The world won't let us have that. You know it won't. Reed Dalton and men like him, they'll come. They'll take me or kill me or burn this place down. We're living on borrowed time. Then we make the most of the time we have, Eli said. However long it is. Mara stood abruptly, wrapping the shawl tighter around herself like armor. You should let me go before they come. Tell them I ran away, that you couldn't stop me. Save yourself. No. Eli. No, he repeated, standing to face her. I didn't buy you to own you, Mara. I don't own you. You can leave any time you want, and I won't stop you. But I won't throw you to the wolves to save my own skin either. If you want to go, go, because you choose it, not because you're trying to protect me. She stared at him, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. The part of her that wanted to run to protect herself to avoid the inevitable pain. And the part that wanted to stay, that had found something here worth fighting for, even if the fight was doomed from the start. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to trust, how to stay, how to believe that something good won't be ripped away. Neither do I, Eli admitted. Lost my whole family. Spent 5 years convincing myself it was easier to be alone. But Mara, I've been alone. It's not easier. It's just emptier. She took a step closer, then another, until she was standing right in front of him. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could count the small scars on her face that told stories he'd never hear. Nitaka, she said softly, the one who remains. That's what you are too. We're both just remaining, aren't we? Just surviving. Maybe, Eli said. Or maybe we're doing something more than that. Maybe we're starting to live again. Mara reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched his hand. Just her fingers against his, a connection so light it was barely there. But Eli felt it like lightning felt the simple human contact all the way to his bones. They stood like that as night fell completely. Two broken people holding on to each other with the lightest of touches, and it felt like the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The moment was shattered by a sound in the distance, hoofbeats multiple horses coming fast. Mara jerked back her hand, flying away from his, her body coiling into a defensive stance. Eli grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the porch railing, his heart hammering. "The barn," he said urgently. "Get in the barn, lock it from inside. Don't come out no matter what happens." Eli, "Go, please." She hesitated for only a second, then ran for the barn, moving like smoke across the darkening yard. Eli watched her disappear inside, heard the heavy bar drop into place on the door, and then turned to face whatever was coming. The riders emerged from the darkness like demons from hell. 4 of them torches held high, their faces twisted into masks of righteous anger. And leading them sitting tall in his saddle like some kind of dark prophet was Reed Dalton. "Hartman," Reed's voice cut through the night. "We need to talk." Eli stepped off the porch rifle held loosely but ready. "It's late, Reed. Whatever you want can wait until morning." "No, it can't." Reed pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet away, his men fanning out behind him. "We've been hearing things, disturbing things, about you and that Comanche girl." "Her name is Mara," Eli said quietly, "and what happens on my property is none of your concern." "It is when you're harboring stolen property," Reed shot back. "That sale weren't legal, Hartman. Everyone knows it. She was my property to sell, and you interfered with a lawful transaction." "Lawful?" Eli's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "You were selling a human being like she was livestock. There's nothing lawful about that. She's a savage and Indian." One of the other men spat on the ground. "They ain't human, and everyone knows it. You got no right keeping her here doing God knows what." "I'm giving her a place to sleep and food to eat," Eli interrupted. "That's all. She works the ranch in exchange fair and square, more fair than anything you men offered her." Reed laughed to sound like breaking glass. "You expect us to believe that a man living alone with a young squaw, and you're telling us nothing's happening. You think we're fools." "I think you're drunk," Eli said flatly, "and I think you need to leave my property before this gets ugly." "It's already ugly, Hartman." Reed's hand moved toward his gun. "You made it ugly when you embarrassed me in front of the whole town, made me look like a fool over a $1 bid." "You made yourself look like a fool, Reed. I just gave you the opportunity." The men behind Reed shifted in their saddles' hands, moving toward weapons. Eli's finger found the trigger of his rifle, not pulling, just resting there, ready. "Last chance, Hartman," Reed said. "Hand over the girl and we'll call it even. We'll take her back to town, hold a proper auction, and you can go back to your pathetic little life out here. Nobody has to get hurt." "She's not going anywhere," Eli said. "And neither are you, not with her." "Then you're a fool and a dead man." "Maybe," Eli agreed. "But I've been dead before. Gettysburg. Came back from that. I'll come back from this too." Reed's face contorted with rage. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think this is noble? You're just a lonely old man who bought himself a whore and can't admit it." The words hung in the air like poison. Eli felt his finger tighten on the trigger, felt the red rage building in his chest. But before he could respond, before the situation could explode into violence, a voice cut through the darkness. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Eli's blood ran cold. No, no, she was supposed to stay hidden, stay safe. The barn door opened and Mara stepped out into the torchlight. She was wearing Sarah's shawl, her head high, her shoulders back. She moved with a grace that was almost regal, walking past Eli to stand between him and the riders. "Mara, get back," Eli started. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. She looked up at Reed Dalton, and there was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, burning defiance. "You want to say these things, say them to my face. Tell me what you think I am. Tell me what you think he is. But do it while looking at me, not hiding behind torches and guns." Reed's horse shifted nervously, picking up on its rider's uncertainty. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. Not a Comanche woman standing tall and speaking perfect English, challenging him with a dignity that made his cruelty look small and pathetic. You don't get to talk, Reed sputtered. You're property. You don't get a voice. I'm not property, Mara said, and her voice could have cut stone. I'm Numinu. I am the daughter of a chief, the granddaughter of warriors. My mother was a healer who knew the name of every plant, every star. My father could track a deer for 3 days without losing the trail. They were people, real people, with souls and stories and love. And you killed them, you and men like you. We didn't, not you personally, perhaps. Mara continued, taking a step forward. The rider's horses shied back. But your kind, your laws, your righteousness that says we're less than human because we look different, live different, love different. You killed us, and then you sold what was left. But I'm still here, still standing, still human despite everything you've done to prove otherwise. This is nonsense, one of the other riders muttered. Reed, let's just take her and try it, Eli said, stepping up beside Mara, his rifle raised. First man who touches her gets a bullet. I promise you that. Reed's eyes darted between them, and Eli could see the calculation happening. 4 men against 1, those were good odds. But Eli was a war veteran, and his first shot would take Reed down before anyone else could draw. Was it worth it? Was pride worth dying over? You're making a mistake, Hartman, Reed said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Town's going to hear about this. They're not going to stand for a white man choosing a savage over his own kind. Then I guess I'm not their kind anymore, Eli said simply. Mara reached over and took Eli's hand. The gesture was simple, but in the torchlight in front of these men, it was a declaration. It said, this is who I choose. This is where I stand. The riders saw it too. Saw the way Eli's hand closed around hers, saw the way they stood together unified. Whatever they'd expected to find here, a helpless woman, a shameful secret, this wasn't it. This ain't over, Reed said, yanking his horse's reins. Not by a long shot, Hartman. You've chosen your side and you're going to regret it. I've regretted a lot of things in my life, Reed, Eli said. This won't be one of them. Reed spurred his horse and the others followed their torches, disappearing into the night like falling stars. The hoofbeats faded and silence fell over the ranch once more, heavy and profound. Eli and Mara stood there, hands still clasped, neither quite ready to let go. The adrenaline was draining from Eli's body, leaving him shaky and exhausted. But Mara stood solid beside him, her presence an anchor. You shouldn't have come out, Eli said finally, his voice rough. They could have what? Taken me anyway, killed you, and then taken me. Mara turned to face him. I'm tired of hiding, Eli. Tired of letting men like that make me small. If this is going to end badly, I want to face it standing up. It doesn't have to end badly. Doesn't it? Mara's eyes were bright in the darkness. You heard him. The town won't let this stand. They'll come back with more men, with more guns. They'll burn this place down before they let you keep me here. Then we'll figure something out. There's nothing to figure out, Mara said, but her hand tightened on his. The world doesn't have a place for people like us. For connections like this? You know that. The world's been wrong before, Eli said stubbornly. The world said slavery was right. Said killing in the name of God was holy. Said I was going to die at Gettysburg. The world's been wrong about a lot of things. Mara studied his face, and slowly and possibly a small smile touched her lips. You're a fool, Eli Hartman. Probably, he agreed, but I'm a fool who's not letting you go without a fight. They stood there in the darkness, the threat of violence still hanging in the air like smoke, but between them was something else, something that felt like hope, like defiance, like two people deciding that maybe, just maybe, they deserved something good, even if the world disagreed. Come on, Eli said gently. Let's get inside. It's been a long night. But Mara didn't move toward the barn. Instead, she looked at the house, then back at Eli. I don't want to sleep in the barn tonight, she said quietly. I don't want to be alone. Eli's breath caught. Mara, I'm not asking for... I just don't want to be alone. Can I stay in the house? There must be another room somewhere I can... Sarah's sewing room, Eli said quickly. It's got a bed, small but comfortable. You can stay there, stay as long as you want. Relief washed over Mara's face. and Eli realized she'd been bracing for rejection for him to send her back to the barn to maintain that careful distance they'd both been pretending was necessary. They walked to the house together, still holding hands, and when Eli opened the door and let her inside, it felt monumental. It felt like crossing some invisible line that could never be uncrossed. He showed her the small room off the kitchen, helped her light the lamp, made sure she had extra blankets. And when he turned to leave to give her privacy, she spoke his name once more. Eli. He paused in the doorway. Yeah. Thank you for standing with me. She struggled for words. For seeing me. Always, Mara, he said softly. I'll always see you. That night, for the first time since her arrival, they slept under the same roof, separated by walls but connected by something stronger than timber and nails. Outside, the desert wind whispered warnings about the storm to come, about Reed Dalton's wounded pride and the town's inevitable judgment. But inside, two survivors rested with marginally less fear, having discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is choose to stop surviving and start living, and that when you find someone willing to stand beside you against the darkness, you hold on with both hands and refuse to let go. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Eli woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle beside his bed before his mind caught up with reality. Mara. She was in the house. The realization settled over him like a warm blanket, chasing away the remnants of nightmares about torches and angry voices. He dressed quickly and emerged to find her standing at the stove, attempting to work the cast-iron beast that had defeated many a grown man. She looked up when he entered, her expression caught somewhere between determination and frustration. This thing hates me, she said, gesturing at the stove with a wooden spoon that Sarah had carved 20 years ago. I can build a fire in a rainstorm with wet wood, but this metal monster refuses to cooperate. Eli couldn't help the smile that tugged at his lips. That stove's got a personality. You have to sweet-talk it a little. He moved to stand beside her, close enough to guide but not to crowd. Here the damper needs to be open first, then you build the fire in the firebox, not the main chamber. She's particular about how she's fed. Mara watched his hands as he adjusted the mechanisms, her attention focused and complete. Sarah always called it Mabel, said it was too stubborn to be a he. Eli struck a match, held it to the kindling. Guess the name stuck. They worked together in companionable silence, Eli teaching her the stove's peculiarities. Mara absorbing the information with that same intensity she brought to everything. Soon the fire was crackling properly, and the smell of coffee began to fill the kitchen, mixing with the golden light of early morning. I'm making breakfast, Mara announced, pulling eggs from the basket with the authority that suggested she wouldn't accept argument. Real breakfast, not the sad things you've been eating. My cooking's not that bad, Eli protested, but he was already sitting at the table, content to watch her move through his kitchen like she belonged there. And maybe she did. Maybe that was the thing neither of them had been ready to admit, that she'd stopped being a guest in his barn and started being something else entirely. Something that didn't have a name yet, but felt real nonetheless. Mara cracked eggs with practiced efficiency, added wild onions she must have gathered from the garden, some herbs he didn't recognize. She moved with a fluid grace that spoke of countless meals prepared of a life before this one where she'd had purpose and place. My mother taught me to cook, she said without prompting, as if she'd felt his questions. She said a woman who can make food from nothing can survive anything. She was right about the first part, at least. She was right about both parts, Eli said quietly. You're here, aren't you? Surviving. More than surviving. Mara's hands stilled for just a moment, then continued their work. Some days, I'm not sure if this counts as surviving or just postponing the inevitable. The words hung heavy in the kitchen air, weighted with the truth they both knew that Reed Dalton wouldn't let this rest, that the confrontation last night had been a warning, not an ending. But before Eli could respond, Mara slid a plate in front of him, and the smell alone made his mouth water. Eat, she commanded. We can worry about the inevitable after breakfast. So they ate, and for a few stolen moments the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the kitchen, the food, the quiet pleasure of sharing a meal with someone who understood what it meant to be grateful for simple things. When they'd finished, Mara stood and began clearing the dishes, but Eli caught her hand. "Wait," he said. "There's something I need to say." She settled back into her chair, her expression cautious but open. "What happened last night?" Eli began choosing his words carefully. "What you did coming out to face them, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. But Mara, I need you to know. I meant what I said. You're not property, not mine, not anyone's. You can leave any time you want. I'll help you, give you money, a horse, whatever you need. You don't owe me anything for—" "Stop." Mara interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "I know I can leave, Eli. I've known that for weeks. I stayed because I chose to stay. I'm still here because I want to be here. Even knowing what's coming, even knowing that staying with me puts a target on your back." "I've had a target on my back since I was 12 years old," Mara said. "At least here I get to choose who I stand with when they aim." Eli's throat tightened with emotion he didn't have words for. "I don't deserve—" "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't do that. Don't make this about what you deserve or don't deserve. This is about what we choose, what we build. And I choose this. I choose you. Not because I owe you, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because in 8 years of hell, you're the first person who treated me like I was still human, like I still mattered." She reached across the table and took both his hands in hers, her grip strong and sure. "So stop trying to save me from this. Stop trying to protect me from my own choices. We face whatever comes together or we don't face it at all. That's the deal." Eli looked at their joined hands, at this woman who'd survived things that would have destroyed him, who'd found strength in places where he'd only found despair. "Together," he agreed, his voice rough. "Whatever comes." The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door, and they both froze. Eli's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but Mara squeezed his fingers, holding him in place. "Careful," she whispered. Eli approached the door slowly, rifle in one hand. "Who is it? Will Patterson, Eli? I'm alone and I come in peace." Eli exchanged a glance with Mara, then opened the door just enough to see. True to his word, Will stood alone, his hands visible and empty, his horse grazing a few yards away. "What do you want, Will?" "To talk." Will set his eyes flicking past Eli to where Mara stood in the kitchen doorway. "May I come in?" Every instinct screamed at Eli to say no, to protect what he and Mara had built by keeping the outside world at bay. But Will had always been decent, had warned them before, and they couldn't hide forever. "Come in," Eli said, stepping aside. "But keep your hands where I can see them." Will entered slowly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed directed more at Mara than Eli. "Ma'am," he said with a small nod. Mara's eyebrows rose slightly at the courtesy, but she didn't respond. She moved to stand beside Eli, presenting a united front. "Say what you came to say, Will," Eli prompted. Will turned his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "Reed's planning something. I don't know exactly what, but he's been gathering men, stirring them up. He's talking about justice, about protecting the town, about teaching you a lesson about where loyalties should lie." "How many men?" Eli asked. "Started with 4. Now he's got maybe 10, maybe more. Some of them are just drunk and stupid looking for excitement, but some—" Will's jaw tightened. "Some of them are mean Eli, the kind that enjoy hurting things, and Reed's promising them a show." Mara's hand found Eli's, their fingers lacing together automatically. "When?" she asked. Will looked at her directly, and there was something like admiration in his eyes. "Tomorrow night, maybe. Day after at the latest. He's waiting for the sheriff to leave town on his circuit. Soon as Law's gone, they'll come." "Why are you telling us this?" Eli asked. "You're risking a lot warning us." "Because what happened in that town square, what Reed did, what they all did, it was wrong," Will said simply. "I've got daughters, Eli. Every time I look at them, I think about that girl on the platform, and I wonder what kind of world I'm leaving them where that's acceptable, where we treat people like livestock and call it justice." He met Mara's eyes. "I can't stop what's coming, but I can give you time to prepare, or to run." "We're not running," Mara said before Eli could speak. "Ma'am, with respect, you don't know Reed Dalton. He's not going to—" "I know men like Reed Dalton," Mara interrupted, her voice hard as iron. "I've known them all my life. They killed my family. They sold me. They tried to break me. But I'm still here, and I'm not running anymore. Will looked at Eli, seeking some kind of reason. Hartman talked sense to her. Even if you survive this, what kind of life can you have? The town will turn on you. Your neighbors will curse you. You'll be outcast, both of you. We're already outcasts, Will, Eli said quietly. And as for the town, I stopped caring what they thought the moment I saw them cheering at a human auction. If that's civilization, I'll take my chances with the wilderness. Will sighed, replacing his hat. I figured you'd say that. Just be ready. Board the windows, stock ammunition, prepare for siege. And Eli, don't hesitate. Men like Reed, they're counting on your decency, your hesitation. Don't give them that advantage. I won't, Eli promised. Will paused at the door, looking back at them one more time. For what it's worth, I hope you make it. I hope you prove that there's still something good left in this damned world. Then he was gone, riding away in a cloud of dust, leaving them with a ticking clock and impossible choices. The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Eli boarded the windows as Will had suggested, reinforcing the walls where he could. Mara helped without being asked, her movements efficient and practiced as if she'd prepared for sieges before. Maybe she had. They worked mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a rhythm to it, a partnership that had developed without either of them noticing. He'd start a task, and she'd anticipate what he needed. She'd reach for a tool, and he'd already be handing it to her. It was the kind of synchronicity that usually took years to build, but they'd compressed it into weeks through necessity and choice. As the sun began its descent, they stood in the fortified house and surveyed their work. It wasn't much, a few boards over windows, extra ammunition, arranged within easy reach, water barrels, filled food stores accessible. It wouldn't stop a determined mob, but it might slow them down. We could still leave, Eli said, though he knew what her answer would be. Take the horse head for the territories. Start over somewhere they don't know us. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Mara shook her head. Running from town to town, hiding what we are lying about, how we know each other. That's not living, Eli. That's just surviving with more steps. At least we'd be alive. Would we? She turned to face him fully. You've been dead for 5 years, Eli. Dead inside, going through motions, existing but not living. I've been dead for 8. We didn't start living again until we stopped running from who we are. Eli knew she was right. He'd spent 5 years in a grave of his own making, and it had taken a $1 bid and a woman with fire in her eyes to resurrect him. Going back to that half-life was worse than any fate Reed Dalton could devise. So we stand, he said. We stand, Mara agreed. That night they sat together on the porch, despite the danger, neither willing to let fear drive them inside. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, and Eli found himself talking about Sarah. Really talking about her for the first time since her death. She was stubborn, he said, a smile touching his lips at the memory. God, was she stubborn. Decided she wanted to marry me when I was too scared to even ask. Decided we'd move out here when I wanted to stay in town. Decided she'd beat that fever, even when the doctor said it was hopeless. She sounds strong, Mara said softly. She was, but not strong enough. Eli's voice cracked. I was at market when it happened. Came home to find her burning up delirious. By morning she was gone, and I didn't even get to say goodbye. Mara's hand found his in the darkness. Tell me about her. Not about losing her, about having her. So Eli did. He told her about Sarah's laugh, which was too loud and always surprised her, about how she sang off key while cooking and made up words when she forgot the real ones, about her obsession with wildflowers, and her terrible poetry, and the way she'd fall asleep reading and deny it when he teased her. And somewhere in the telling, the grief that had been a stone in his chest for 5 years began to shift to transform into something else. Not gone, it would never be gone, but no longer the defining feature of his existence. She would have liked you, Eli said finally. Sarah. She would have thought you were fierce and wonderful, would have taught you to read faster than I have probably, would have... He stopped, overwhelmed by the strangeness of wishing 2 people he loved could have known each other. I wish I could have met her, Mara said, and there was no jealousy in her voice, only genuine regret. She made you the man who could see me as human, who could stand against his own kind for a stranger. That's a gift.
Mara, I...
Eli turned to face her, and in the starlight she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with the soul that burned behind her eyes. I need you to know whatever happens tomorrow or the day after these weeks with you, they've meant, don't. Mara interrupted. Don't say goodbye. Not yet. We've still got time. How much time? Enough, she said, and then she was leaning in and Eli was meeting her halfway, and their lips touched with a gentleness that belied the violence surrounding them. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than a statement, but when neither pulled away when Eli's hand came up to cup her face and Mara's fingers tangled in his shirt, it deepened into something more, into a promise, a defiance, a declaration that said, this is ours, this moment, this feeling, and no one can take it from us. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Mara rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered the words barely audible. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, Eli Hartman. Eli's eyes burned with unshed tears. I love you too. God help me, I love you too. They held each other as the night deepened, two souls who'd found each other in the wreckage of their lives, who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. And if tomorrow brought violence, if Reed Dalton and his mob came with torches and rope, at least they'd have this one perfect moment of truth before the storm. The next day dawned clear and bright, mocking them with its beauty. Eli and Mara moved through the morning like soldiers before battle-checking preparations, saying little, touching often. Every glance held weight, every contact a reminder of what they stood to lose. It was afternoon when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, larger than before, darker, more ominous. Eli counted the riders as they approached 12, maybe 15. More than enough to overwhelm two people in a ranch house, no matter how well prepared. It's time, he said unnecessarily. Mara nodded, her jaw set with determination. She'd changed into pants and a shirt of Eli's, her hair braided back tight. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle, and Eli's heart swelled with pride and terror in equal measure. They took their positions, Eli at the front window, Mara at the side, both with rifles loaded and ready. The riders came on steady, not rushing, taking their time. They knew they had the advantage of numbers. They could afford to be patient. Reed Dalton led them, and even from a distance, Eli could see the cruel satisfaction on his face. This wasn't about justice or morality anymore, if it ever had been. This was about pride, about power, about a man who couldn't stand being made to look small. The rider stopped just out of rifle range, and Reed dismounted with theatrical slowness. He walked forward alone, hands raised to show he was unarmed, stopping about 50 yards from the house. "Hartman," he called out, "I'm giving you one last chance. Send out the girl, and we'll leave you be. Keep her, and we'll take her anyway, and you'll hang for harboring stolen property." Eli opened the door just enough to be seen, his rifle pointed squarely at Reed's chest. "She's not property, Reed, and she's not going anywhere." "Then you're a dead man." Reed's face flushed with anger. "You hear me, Hartman? You're choosing a savage over your own kind, and that makes you a traitor. The law's on our side." "The law's 40 miles away," Eli shouted back, "and it doesn't make what you're doing right." "Right." Reed laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You want to talk about right? You want to lecture me about morality while you're living in sin with a Comanche whore?" Eli's finger tightened on the trigger, but a hand on his shoulder stopped him. Mara stepped past him out onto the porch, standing tall and fearless in the face of 15 armed men. "My name is Mara," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "I am Numenu. I am nobody's property, and this man," she gestured to Eli, "is worth 100 of you. He sees people as human, not as things to be owned or sold or destroyed. That's more than any of you can say." Reed's face went from red to purple. "You don't get to speak savage. You don't get a voice here." "Then stop me," Mara challenged. "Come up here and try. But know this, I won't go quietly. I won't go at all. And if you think you can take me without blood, you're wrong. If you think you can break us by force, you're wrong. We stand together and we don't fall easy." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Reed's face. He'd expected fear, expected begging, expected them to crack under pressure. Instead, he was facing two people who'd already lost everything and found something worth dying for. That kind of conviction was dangerous, unpredictable. But pride won out over caution, as it always did with men like Reed. He turned back to his men, raised his arm, and shouted, "Take them $10 to the man who brings me the girl alive!" The riders spurred their horses forward, and the world exploded into chaos. Eli fired, and a man fell from his saddle screaming. Mara's rifle cracked, and another went down. But there were too many, and they kept coming, spreading out, trying to surround the house. Eli reloaded with practiced speed, fired again, dropped another rider. Beside him, Mara was a revelation, calm, focused, deadly accurate. She moved between windows like smoke firing from different angles, making it seem like there were more defenders than there were. But they were still just 2 against 15, and the math was inevitable. The riders reached the house, and Eli heard them on the roof, heard them battering at the boarded windows. A torch came through one window, and Mara stamped it out, her face grim. "Eli," she shouted over the noise. "We can't hold them." "I know." He fired through a gap in the boards, heard someone curse in pain. "But we make them pay for every inch." The door shuddered under repeated blows, the bar beginning to crack. Eli abandoned the window, took position facing the door, rifle raised. If they came through, he'd take as many as he could before the door exploded inward, and men poured through like water through a broken dam. Eli fired, worked the lever, fired again. Bodies fell, but more kept coming. He saw Mara swing her rifle like a club, saw her connect with someone's head, saw that person drop. Then someone hit him from behind, and Eli went down hard, his rifle skittering across the floor. Hands grabbed him, hauled him up, slammed him against the wall. Through blurred vision, he saw Mara fighting like a wildcat, kicking, biting, clawing, refusing to be taken. "Mara?" he shouted, struggling against the men who held him. "Eli!" She reached for him, her fingers stretching across the distance, and then someone backhanded her across the face, and she crumpled. "No!" Eli roared, thrashing with renewed fury. He broke free from one man, lunged for Mara, but someone clubbed him with a rifle butt, and the world tilted sideways. When his vision cleared, he was on his knees, blood running down his face, his arms wrenched behind his back. Mara was being dragged to her feet. Her lips split, a bruise already forming on her cheek. Their eyes met across the destroyed room, and Eli saw not fear but apology in her gaze, as if she was sorry for not being strong enough to stop this. Reed Dalton stepped through the broken door, surveying the carnage with satisfaction. 3 of his men were dead, 4 more injured, badly enough to be out of the fight. But he'd won, and that was all that mattered to him. "Well, well," he said, walking slowly toward Eli. The war hero, brought down by his own foolishness. He crouched in front of Eli, his smile cruel. "I told you, Hartman, I told you she'd be your death, but you couldn't listen. Couldn't see reason." "Let her go," Eli said through bloody lips. "Take me, do whatever you want to me, but let her go." Reed laughed. "Let her go after all this, after she helped you kill my men." He stood, walked over to Mara. "No, I think she's going to watch what happens to men who forget their place, and then we'll decide what to do with her." He nodded to his men, and they dragged Eli outside Mara, screaming behind him, fighting her captors with everything she had. They threw Eli to the ground in front of the house, and he looked up to see a rope being thrown over a tree branch, a noose tied with practiced ease. This was it then. This was how it ended. Not in glory, not in victory, but in the dust of his own ranch at the end of a rope for the crime of loving someone the world said he shouldn't. But as they hauled him to his feet, as they slipped the noose over his head, Eli found he had no regrets. He'd lived more in the last few weeks than in the previous 5 years. He'd found love again, had stood for something that mattered, had proven to himself that he was still capable of being human. He looked toward the house and saw Mara being held in the doorway, forced to watch. Their eyes locked, and he tried to pour everything he couldn't say into that look. His love, his gratitude, his sorrow, that they didn't get more time. Then Mara did something that stopped everyone cold. She smiled. Not a smile of happiness, but of defiance, of unbreakable spirit. And she spoke, her voice ringing out clear and strong in the settling dust. "Nithaka," she called to him, "the one who remains. You showed me how, Eli. You showed me how to remain, how to stand, How to love even when the world says you shouldn't. That's worth everything. That's worth this. Reed backhanded her, but she kept smiling through the blood, kept her eyes on Eli. And Eli understood. Win or lose, live or die, they'd already won the only battle that mattered. They'd chosen each other, had found something real in a world of cruelty and lies. Reed could take their lives, but he couldn't take that. He couldn't make it less true. The rope tightened around Eli's neck, and he closed his eyes. Mara's face, the last thing he saw, her voice, the last thing he heard, as someone slapped the horse beneath him, and the world dropped away. The gunshot cracked through the air like the voice of God himself, and the rope went slack. Eli crashed to the ground, gasping, the noose still around his neck, but no longer pulling him toward death. His vision swam with black spots, his lungs screaming for air, but through the chaos he heard shouting the thunder of hoofbeats. More gunfire. Federal Marshal, every man drop your weapons or face federal charges. Eli rolled onto his side, clawing at the noose, fighting to breathe. Through blurred vision, he saw riders, at least 20 of them, surrounding Reed's mob rifles trained on every man. At their head rode a figure Eli recognized even through his oxygen-starved haze. Marshal James Crawford, a man Eli had served with at Gettysburg, who'd been promoted to federal service after the war. James, Eli croaked, his voice barely a whisper. The marshal dismounted in one fluid motion, kneeling beside Eli to help remove the noose. Easy, Eli. Easy now. You're alive. Just breathe. Eli's lungs finally remembered how to work, pulling in great gasps of air that hurt and felt glorious at the same time. Mara, he managed. We've got her, James assured him. She's safe. Eli's head cleared enough to see the scene unfolding around him. Reed's men were being disarmed, forced to their knees, their hands bound behind their backs. Reed himself stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, as two deputies relieved him of his weapons. And they're being helped down the porch steps by Will Patterson, of all people, was Mara. Her face was bruised, her lips still bleeding, but she was alive and moving on her own power. When her eyes found Eli's across the chaos, the relief that washed over her face was so profound it brought tears to his eyes. She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside James, her hands immediately going to Eli's face, checking his injuries with a tenderness that made his chest ache. You're alive, she breathed. Oh God, Eli, I thought, I'm here. He managed, his voice raw from the rope. I'm here. James stood, giving them a moment, and turned his attention to Reed Dalton. Reed Dalton, he said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. You are under arrest for attempted murder, unlawful assembly with intent to commit violence, destruction of property, and violation of federal Reconstruction laws. Your friends here are looking at similar charges. This is outrageous, Reed sputtered. We were enforcing— You were lynching a man, James cut him off coldly, in front of 15 witnesses who rode with me, all of whom will testify to what they saw. You want to add lying to a federal officer to your charges? Reed's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came. The reality of his situation was finally penetrating his skull. Federal charges meant federal prison, meant years, maybe decades, locked away. His precious pride had just cost him everything. Will Patterson stepped forward, hat in hand, looking sheepish and determined at the same time. Marshal, I can testify too. I warned them this was coming, tried to get them to leave peaceable, but Mr. Hartman here, he wouldn't run. Said he'd rather stand for what was right. James looked at Will with newfound respect. You, the one who rode to my office, told me what was happening. Yes, sir, Will admitted. Couldn't stand by and watch anymore. What happened in that town square, what they were planning here, it ain't right, ain't Christian, ain't human. Took courage to do that, James said. Took courage to ride against your own town. Wasn't my town anymore, Will said simply. Not when it stood for this. James turned his attention to Eli and Mara, helping them both to their feet. Eli swayed dangerously, but Mara was there, her arm around his waist, supporting him with a strength that belied her size. Eli Hartman, James said, a slight smile touching his lips. Still getting yourself into impossible situations, I see. James, Eli rasped. How did you— Will rode 3 days straight to find me. Told me what was happening, what Reed was planning. I gathered every available deputy and rode hard. James glanced at the bodies of Reed's men who hadn't survived the initial assault on the house. Looks like we almost didn't make it in time. You made it exactly when you needed to, Eli said, his hand finding Mara's and holding tight. That's what matters. James studied them both for a long moment, taking in their joined hands, the way they leaned into each other, the obvious connection between them. This the woman at the center of all this? This is Mara, Eli said, his voice growing stronger. And she's not at the center of anything. She's just a person trying to live her life. Everything else that's on them. He gestured at Reed and his captured men. James extended his hand to Mara, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Ma'am, he said with genuine respect, I apologize on behalf of the federal government for what you've endured. What happened to you in that town square? What these men tried to do, it's illegal under federal Reconstruction law. You're a free citizen with all the rights and protections that entails. Mara's eyes widened slightly. Free, James confirmed. Any claim of ownership, any so-called sale, it's all void under federal law. You owe nothing to anyone. You go where you want, do what you want, live how you want. The words seemed to hit Mara like a physical force. She swayed and Eli's arm tightened around her, holding her up. Free, she repeated, as if testing the word, as if trying to believe it could apply to her. There's more, James continued. Federal government's been cracking down on illegal auctions on the selling of indigenous peoples. Every man involved in that town square auction, they're facing federal charges, prison time. The auctioneer, the men who captured you, sold you, we're building cases against all of them. Silas Blackwood, Eli asked. Already in custody in Santa Fe, James said with satisfaction, singing like a canary trying to reduce his sentence. He's given us names, dates, locations. We're taking down an entire network. Reed made a strangled sound of protest, but a deputy's rifle butt to his shoulder silenced him. James ignored the interruption, his attention still on Mara. I'll need your testimony, he said gently. About what happened to you, who was involved, what you witnessed. I know it won't be easy reliving it all, but your words could help put these people away for a long time. Could help other women who've suffered the same. Mara's jaw tightened and Eli could feel her trembling against him. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. I'll testify. I'll tell it all. Every detail, every name, every face. They took 8 years from me. I want them to pay for every single day. Pride surged through Eli's chest. Even now, even after everything, she had the courage to face her demons, to speak truth to power. She was, he thought, the bravest person he'd ever known. James nodded approvingly. We'll do this proper with a court recorder when you're ready. No rush. He turned to his deputies. Get these men loaded up. We're taking them to Santa Fe to face federal charges. And someone get a doctor out here. These two need tending. As the deputies began the process of removing Reed and his men, Reed caught Eli's eye one last time. The hatred there was palpable, burning bright, even in defeat. This isn't over, Hartman, Reed hissed as he was dragged past. Even from prison, You'll do nothing, James interrupted coldly. You'll sit in a cell and think about the choices that put you there. And if I hear even a whisper of threats, I'll add intimidation of a witness to your charges. Now move. They dragged Reed away and Eli watched him go with a mixture of relief and something like pity. Reed had destroyed himself over pride, over the inability to let go of perceived slights. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what hate and bitterness could do to a soul. Will Patterson approached them hesitantly. Mr. Hartman, Miss Mara, I'm sorry. Sorry for not standing up sooner, for not stopping the auction in the first place. I should have. You saved our lives, Will. Eli interrupted. You rode 3 days to bring help. You stood up when it mattered. That's more than most men can say. The town, Will said, his voice heavy. There's going to be talk about what happened here, about you two. Not everyone's going to say it. Let them talk, Mara said firmly. We're not living for their approval anymore. Will nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a deed. To my store. I'm leaving Copper Ridge, taking my family somewhere better. Somewhere my daughters won't grow up thinking what happened in that square is normal. He pressed the paper into Eli's hand. Sell it, keep it, burn it. I don't care. Just know that not everyone in that town is like Reed. Some of us are just cowards who are trying to find our courage. With that, Will turned and walked to his horse, mounting up and riding away without looking back. Eli stared at the deed in his hand, overwhelmed by the gesture, by the complexity of human nature that could contain both cruelty and kindness, cowardice and courage. The next hours passed in a blur. A doctor arrived and tended to their wounds. Eli's rope burned his cracked ribs, the gash on his head. Mara's split lip, her bruises, the cuts on her hands from fighting. James and his men cleared the bodies. Began the process of documenting the scene, took preliminary statements. Through it all, Eli and Mara stayed close, their hands finding each other constantly, as if they needed the physical contact to believe they'd survived, that they were really safe. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold that seemed too beautiful for such a violent day, James approached them one last time. "I'll be back in a few weeks to take your full testimony," he said. "Until then, you two lay low, heal up. The men responsible are in custody, but there might be others sympathetic to Reed's cause. Stay vigilant." "We will," Eli promised. James hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, Eli, what you did standing up for her, choosing her over your own safety. Sarah would have been proud. She always said you were the best of us, the one who never forgot his humanity, even when the war tried to take it." Eli's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. "You knew Sarah. Met her twice when she visited you at camp. She was something special." Oh, James glanced at Mara. "Seems you've got a gift for finding extraordinary women." "They find me," Eli said softly. "I'm just smart enough to recognize what I've got." James smiled, tipped his hat to Mara, and mounted his horse. Within minutes, the federal men were gone, taking Reed and his captured mob with them, leaving Eli and Mara alone in the wreckage of their ranch. They stood in silence for a long moment, surveying the damage. The door was destroyed. Windows shattered, blood staining the porch. The house that had been their sanctuary was now a battlefield marked by violence and death. "We can rebuild," Mara said quietly, "if you want to stay." Eli looked at her, at this woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger, who'd faced down a lynch mob with courage he could barely comprehend, who'd chosen to stand with him, even when running would have been safer. "Do you want to stay?" he asked. "You're free now, Mara, really free. You could go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to—" "Stop," she interrupted, turning to face him fully. "Stop trying to give me permission to leave. I'm staying because I choose to stay. Because this—" She gestured at the ranch at him, at the space between them. "This is home. Not the house, not the land, you, us. This thing we've built. That's home." Eli pulled her close, mindful of her injuries, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat against his ribs, steady and strong, a reminder that they were both alive, both here, both choosing this. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Mara said, a hint of humor in her voice. "You should be terrified. Love is the most dangerous thing there is. It makes you vulnerable, makes you care about something more than your own survival." "Is that so terrible?" "No," she said softly. "It's the most beautiful thing in the world." They stood like that as the sun completed its descent, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, the desert whispered its ancient songs, indifferent to human drama, constant in its rhythm of life and death and life again. Finally, Mara pulled back, wincing slightly at her injuries. "We should go inside to tend to the house, start cleaning up." But when they turned toward the broken door, Eli hesitated. "Mara, wait. There's something I need to say, something I need to ask." She looked at him curiously, and Eli realized his heart was pounding harder than it had, even when the noose was around his neck. This was scarier than death, scarier than any mob. This was hope, raw and vulnerable and terrifying. "When Reed called you my wife," Eli began, his voice rough with emotion, "it wasn't true. Not legally, not officially. But Mara, I want it to be true. I want you to be my wife. Not because the law says so, or because it's convenient, or because it protects you from men like Reed. I want you to be my wife because I can't imagine spending another day without you, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, because you make me want to be the man Sarah always believed I could be. Mara's eyes widened, filling with tears. Eli, I don't have a ring. He continued, the words tumbling out now. I don't have much of anything really. A broken-down ranch, a dark past, a future that's uncertain at best. But I have love. I have devotion. I have a promise that I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to deserve you. So, Mara, will you— Yes, she interrupted, laughing through her tears. Yes, you foolish, beautiful man. Yes, I'll marry you. Eli's breath left him in a rush, and he pulled her close again, kissing her with all the desperate relief and joy he couldn't put into words. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, holding him like she'd never let go. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the strange twist of fate that had brought them from a $1 auction to this moment of perfect, impossible happiness. We should do it soon, Mara said, wiping at her eyes, before the world tries to tear us apart again. Tomorrow, Eli suggested. We'll ride to the next town, find a minister, make it official. Tomorrow, Mara agreed. But tonight, let's just be here, together, alive. They went inside and began the work of reclaiming their home from violence. They swept up broken glass, scrubbed blood from the floors, salvaged what they could, and discarded what was beyond repair. It was hard work made harder by their injuries, but they moved through it together, finding rhythm and purpose in the simple act of rebuilding. As they worked, they talked, really talked about everything and nothing. Mara told him more about her childhood, about her mother's healing knowledge and her father's skill with horses. She described ceremonies, she remembered songs that had been sung, the feeling of belonging to something larger than herself. The pain was there in her telling the grief of all she'd lost, but so was love. So was pride in her heritage. Eli told her about his own childhood, about parents who died when he was young, about the uncle who'd raised him with rough kindness and simple wisdom. He talked about enlisting in the army at 18, about the war that had stolen his innocence, about coming home to find that peace was harder than battle. They shared their ghosts, their regrets, their hopes. And in the sharing, the ghosts became lighter, the regrets less sharp, the hopes more real. It was near midnight when they finally stopped, exhausted but satisfied with their progress. The house would never be quite the same. The scars of violence would always be visible, but it was theirs again, reclaimed through love and labor. Mara stood in the doorway of what would be their bedroom. No more separate rooms, no more careful distance, and looked back at Eli with an expression of such tenderness it made his chest ache. "Come to bed," she said softly. "We've earned some rest." Eli followed her, and they lay down together, fitting themselves to each other like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Mara's head rested on his chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, their legs tangled beneath the quilt Sarah had made a lifetime ago. "Eli," Mara whispered into the darkness. "What? Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me when the world said you shouldn't." Eli pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for teaching me how to live again." They drifted toward sleep, safe in each other's arms, and for the first time in either of their lives, the nightmares stayed away. There were no battlefields, no auctions, no violence in their dreams. There was only peace, hard-won and precious beyond measure. The days that followed were a strange mix of healing and building, of looking back and moving forward. They rode to the next town and were married by a circuit preacher who asked no questions and offered only blessings. The ceremony was simple, no flowers, no fancy clothes, just two people making promises they intended to keep. When the preacher asked if there was anyone who objected to the union, Mara looked at Eli and said, "The whole world objects. We're doing it anyway." The preacher laughed at that, and Eli thought Sarah would have liked her even more for the spirit in those words. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife and set about making it truly theirs. They repaired the damage from the attack, but they also made changes, adding a garden bed for Mara's medicines and herbs, building a workshop where Eli could craft furniture, creating spaces that reflected both of them rather than just his past. Mara's garden flourished under her care, blooming with plants that shouldn't have survived in the harsh desert soil, but did anyway, because she knew their secrets knew how to coax life from impossible conditions. She taught Eli their names, both the English and the Numenu words, and he wrote them down in Sarah's old botany book, adding to its pages, building a bridge between two lives, two loves, two worlds. True to his word, Marshal James Crawford returned 3 weeks later to take their full testimony. The process was painful. Mara had to relive every moment of her captivity, every horror inflicted upon her. But Eli sat beside her through all of it, holding her hand, being her anchor, and when it was done, James assured them that the testimony would help put away not just Reed and his men, but an entire network of flesh traders. "You're helping people you'll never meet," James told Mara, "saving lives that would have been destroyed. That takes real courage." News from town filtered in slowly. Reed Dalton and his men had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Silas Blackwood got 20. Others were still being rounded up, still facing justice. The town of Copper Ridge was in upheaval, some leaving like Will Patterson. Others doubling down on their prejudices, a few beginning to question the beliefs they'd held without examination. Eli and Mara didn't much care what the town thought anymore. They'd built something here that didn't need the world's approval to be real, to be valuable, to be worth protecting. Seasons turned. Fall gave way to winter, winter to spring. The ranch thrived under their joint efforts. Eli's practical knowledge combined with Mara's intuitive understanding of the land created something neither could have achieved alone. They acquired more cattle, fixed up the barn, even built a small addition to the house. And through it all, they loved each other with a fierceness born of knowing how easily it could have been lost. Every morning, Eli would wake to find Mara beside him and feel a surge of gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Every night, Mara would fall asleep in his arms and marvel that she'd found safety, found home, found love in the last place she'd expected to find it. They had visitors occasionally. James Crawford checking in, Will Patterson stopping by on his way to California with his family, even a few neighbors who'd heard the story and wanted to see for themselves the couple who'd defied convention and survived. But mostly, they had each other, and in a world that had tried its best to break them both, that was more than enough. It was a year to the day after the auction when Mara found Eli working in the garden, his hands dirty, his face creased with concentration as he tried to coax a stubborn plant into growth. "You're doing it wrong," she said, amusement in her voice. "Am I now?" Eli looked up with a grin. "And here I thought I was getting the hang of it." Mara knelt beside him, her hands covering his, guiding them to the right depth, the right angle. "Like this, gentle but firm. The plant needs to know you're supporting it, not forcing it." They worked together in companionable silence until the plant was properly settled. Then Mara sat back, brushed the dirt from her hands, and said, "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made Eli's heart skip. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right," Mara said, and she was smiling now, that brilliant smile that still had the power to stop his breath. "I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop spinning. Eli stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words to understand the enormity of what she'd just said. "Pregnant? We're going to have a baby." "Yes," Mara laughed, taking his hands. "A baby. Our baby. A new life born from all this death and survival. A chance to build something that's completely ours." Eli pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, which she was, and felt tears streaming down his face. After Sarah, after losing his stillborn son, he'd thought this chance was gone forever. But here it was gifted to him by a woman who'd been bought for $1 and who'd become worth more than all the gold in the world. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "God, Mara, I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes, whatever the world throws at us, I'm not afraid. Because we have this. We have each other. We have hope." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the desert wind singing around them, the garden blooming at their feet, and the future uncertain but theirs stretching out before them like an open road. In the end, it wasn't the dramatic rescue that saved them, though that had been important. It wasn't the legal justice served to their enemies, though that had been satisfying. What saved them, what truly redeemed them, was the choice they made every single day to love each other, to build something beautiful in a world that had tried to teach them only destruction. $1. That's what Reed Dalton had sneered at, what the town had laughed about, what had seemed like the ultimate insult. But that $1 had bought something priceless, not a person, but a chance. A chance for two broken souls to find each other, to heal together, to prove that love was stronger than hate, that hope could bloom in the harshest soil, that one small act of decency could ripple outward and change everything. Eli Hartman had stepped onto that auction platform, expecting nothing, and he'd walked away with everything. Mara had stood there in chains, and she'd found freedom. Not the freedom granted by law, but the freedom that comes from being truly seen, truly known, truly loved. The desert sun set on another day, painting their ranch in gold and crimson, and Eli and Mara walked hand in hand toward their home, scarred, but standing imperfect but theirs. Behind them, the garden bloomed. Ahead of them, their child waited to be born. Around them, the vast indifference of the world continued, but they'd carved out a space within it that was all warmth and light and love. They'd survived. More than that, they'd lived. And in a world that had tried to reduce them both to less than human, they'd proven something that no law, no mob, no hatred could ever take away, that they were beautifully, defiantly, impossibly human, and that humanity was enough. That night, as they lay in bed, Mara's hand resting on the small swell of her belly, Eli thought about that moment on the auction platform, about the words that had changed everything. $1? He murmured. What? Mara asked sleepily. Best dollar I ever spent, he said, kissing her temple. Best investment of my life. Mara laughed softly. You didn't buy me, Eli. You freed us both. And she was right. That $1 hadn't purchased a person, it had liberated two souls, had given them permission to be whole again, had proven that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant. Inside, two hearts beat in rhythm, and a third tiny heartbeat was just beginning a new story waiting to unfold. The past had been written in pain and blood and loss. But the future was theirs to write, and they would fill its pages with love, with courage, with the quiet defiance of people who refuse to let the world define them. $1. One chance. One love that was worth more than all the treasures of the earth, and that in the end was worth everything.